5 of the Best is an opinion-based series on films which I have seen released during the chosen year. This is to celebrate previous years in film, not to cause any offence. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome to 5 of the Best, a series in which we celebrate movies year by year. This series of videos will consist of me discussing my 5 favourite films of this chosen year. Today's video we are talking about the year 2010. So let's get started. Before we get into our top 5, here are a few of the honourable mentions from this year. The Fighter, Toy Story 3, 127 Hours, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Black Swan, The Book of Eli, and Insidious. Now, let's get on to the list and start with number 5. The Other Guys is directed by Adam McKay, is written by Adam McKay and Chris Henchy, and stars Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg. So we start this year in 5 of the Best by kind of continuing the trend of the recent videos, which has been comedy films being included in this kind of, and I mentioned it before, for me personally, like a really significant era in comedies, kind of 2008 to 2012, maybe up to 2014. Around that kind of time we've had so many, and already so many have featured on the 5 of the Best, and The Other Guys is just another example of some of the finest comedy work, some of the finest just hilariously memorable dialogue between characters. And it's something that, let's start with the obvious. Let's start with the man who kind of seems to transcend all of these films, or a large portion of these films, and that's Mr. Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell in all of these films plays essentially Will Ferrell, and in comedy films that can become a little played out, and certainly by the time we're at present day, maybe the Will Ferrell character has maybe ran its course, and we have similar things like that now with things like Ryan Reynolds and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who by the way is in this film in a very early part of his certainly before he becomes the highest paid actor in the world. But it does become this thing where they've got their shtick, they've got their mannerisms, their exact person in every film, and that's what Will Ferrell is. But at this time, this has not been played out. This is not too far after Step Brothers, and this is Will Ferrell in prime Will Ferrell mode. He is so good in this film. But you probably knew that already. Seeing him on the poster, you probably knew that this is one of the great Will Ferrell comedies. But the other one, and the more interesting actor and performance in this to talk about, is Mark Wahlberg. Now, if you've been on the channel for a while, you'll know that I've said before that Mark Wahlberg has, I would say, one great performance in 10. Kind of 9 stinkers, 1 really good. For every Boogie Nights, you've got Pain and Gain. Things like that. There's quite a contrast in his list of films that he's been in. But Mark Wahlberg in The Other Guys is actually really good. Really good. And he's not someone that I would really have coined as a great comedic actor. And while he isn't like the reason this film is top tier, but his dynamic between himself and his character and the other, the situation that he's in, but the way him and Will Ferrell bounce off each other. And you're probably thinking to yourself, he says that about all the comedies, but that's right. It's the dynamic between the comedy characters. Of course, comedies are subjective. I've said this all a million times about, I'll find this hilarious because it's a certain type of humour that really connected with me at the time. And when I rewatch it now, I feel kind of the hilarity of the nostalgia, if you get what I mean. But having the two of these guys in The Other Guys doing such a great job, the story being told suits so well to enable such funny comedy and such really memorable moments throughout this film. And I don't really want to get into any of them because I'd rather you just watch it yourself. And it's one of those comedies, I think, if you enjoy the comedies of this era, the Superbads, the Step Brothers, and these kind of films, even something through to 21 Jump Street, it's that kind of ilk. It's that kind of brilliant snappy, memorable dialogue, memorable quotes that just stick with you. Similar actors, similar dynamics, similar situations, but you would think even by now, even by the time of this film coming out, and it's been a few years since the first of these kind of films. I suppose the first that really sticks out to me, and it was an honourable mention a while back, was The 40-Year-Old Virgin. It was the first film of these comedies that kind of set the tone, and they all kind of follow kind of a similar roadmap of how the film is made and how the comedies and the beats and how it goes along as a film. But that doesn't mean that maybe now, maybe at this point in this year, in present day, they're maybe slightly played out. But at this time, it was just the creme de la creme. The comedy that just hit the right spot. And The Other Guys is just yet another example of a brilliant comedy in this era. Number 4. Shutter Island is directed by Martin Scorsese and stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo. Now, straight off the bat, you probably think to yourself, Leonardo DiCaprio, Martin Scorsese? Surely this is a shoe-in for a great film. And you're not wrong. Having Scorsese directing a film like this, a film of tension, and it's definitely in the category, I would say, of thriller, of a really intriguing film. It's probably the best word I can use to describe Shutter Island. It's a film that I would describe as it dangles the carrot. It makes you think as the audience. You're starting to get it. You're starting to learn the story, and you're learning with the character. You're learning with Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo in this detective discovery story, if you like, of I feel that I'm learning, I'm feeling I'm getting all the clues and I'm picking it up. But the best thing about a film, something that if a film is done so right, it makes it so good, is when the film is just always a step ahead of you as the audience member. And watching Shutter Island is the first time. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. If you haven't seen it, give yourself an opportunity to. You will understand what I mean. You feel it, and I describe it as dangling the carrot. You know, you feel like you almost have it. You feel like you've almost cracked the code, and then there's a little bit of information given. You go, oh, that completely flips that. That completely puts me back two paces, and now I have to learn even more to be on par with where the story is taking us. And I think it's just such wonderful storytelling throughout Shutter Island, and it's a film that really encapsulates what Leonardo DiCaprio is all about. And bit of a spoiler, he will also be on the list again this year, but we'll get there. And it really is one of the years of Leo, as we'll call it, because Leonardo DiCaprio in Shutter Island, it's one of his, I would say, most grueling performances. It's one of those performances that, while he always puts in, especially around this era, kind of from now in the year of 2010 all the way through to probably present day, you've really got him in his prime where every performance is a knock it out of the park performance. But in Shutter Island you have one that's a visceral and an emotional performance, and a performance that it's really, you connect with it in some ways, but also get quite detached in other ways. And it's conveyed so well by him and his performances. And you know that. I don't need to tell you how good Leonardo DiCaprio is. But the performance I do want to talk about as well is Mark Ruffalo. Mark Ruffalo as Leonardo DiCaprio's kind of Watson to Sherlock, if you like, is also really underrated in this film. Mark Ruffalo, obviously known not too far off the Avengers at this point, and obviously a few years away from that film. But Mark Ruffalo, around this time, we had Zodiac a few years back, and he was also brilliant in that. That wasn't one that managed to make it into the top 5, but his performance in that film too. But him in this one in particular, I think it's one of Mark Ruffalo's better performances. And the way he enables Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Teddy, in the film to really push on and become what the story wants it to be. It's a brilliant performance, and it's very underrated. Some of the other performances throughout the film, Ben Kingsley as well, and Michelle Williams, they're probably the two others that I would say really, they bring so much to this. John Carroll Lynch as well, also in the Zodiac film. There was just quite a lot, and I could see a little bit of, maybe not inspiration, but certainly what they maybe seen worked in Zodiac, and in seeing that was set and you know, the scenes that were set in that film, and the roles that Mark Ruffalo, and the performance also of John Carroll Lynch, which really, I can see some connection there. Maybe I'm the only one that's drawn that connection. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe ignore me. but in the overall view of the film, Shutter Island is a wonderfully told thriller. It's a film that really, I find, is so well crafted. And when you talk about well crafted and Martin Scorsese, they're usually in the same sentences. Martin Scorsese, of course, we've talked about quite a lot so far, and we will continue to talk about. He will continue to appear on Five of the Best as a director, because a lot of his films are definitely going to make it in the future. And in this one, you've got yet another just great outing by both him, his lead actor Leonardo DiCaprio, supporting cast, wonderful tale. Shutter Island is it's top quality, and it's a film that I think if you haven't seen, it's a brilliant film on first viewing. And on second viewing, watching it again, there's also enjoyability to be had. There's also clues to unravel that maybe you didn't the first time around, and it makes it rewatchable film. But certainly that first viewing is the key. If you haven't seen it, that's definitely one I would recommend to give yourself a chance to really soak in on the first view. Number 3. The Social Network. It's directed by David Fincher and stars Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield. So The Social Network as a film, or probably better titled How Was Facebook Founded and All the Drama That Comes With It, is a film that really, truly captures actually such a brilliant way of how businesses are started up. And it's quite a business orientated film. Now a lot of people will probably hear that and go, oh, don't know about that. But what really hits this one home, because I'm sure yourself, myself, and everybody, including your mum, your grandma, your dog, everybody has used Facebook at some point in their life. Everybody has probably made a cringy status. Everybody has probably blocked someone they didn't want to see anymore on their timeline. Facebook is such a worldwide thing. But to see how it was crafted, and I know of course this film is a dramatization, a bit like the Crown television series of the real monarchy. It's certainly kind of a lot of points that are true, but dialed up to 11. But you can imagine in The Social Network, a lot of this stuff is truer than they would want to admit in reality. People like Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin, the kind of two opposing forces in this film, that start, of course, in a unison. They start, of course, in a situation where they've made the most, is it the most profitable website? Maybe Google is probably the most profitable, but certainly up there in one of the greatest business ventures of all time. Certainly that argument can be made, the profit that they have made in that. And in the two core performances, in Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield. Now, Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield are probably two actors that have received quite a lot of criticism for their performances. Jesse Eisenberg has had things like Lex Luthor in the Batman vs Superman atrocity, which I'm going to tell you now. Batman vs Superman, now this might shock you, so call yourself surprised if this is the case, but Batman vs Superman is not going to appear on Five of the Best for that year. I know, big shock. And him as Lex Luthor in that film, probably rightly, it's weird because he just isn't right for that role. So many people said it at the time. It wouldn't have made it, whether it was the greatest performance of all time, it was the greatest actor that was put in the role, it wouldn't have made a difference. But the problem with Jesse Eisenberg is because he gets tainted for performances like that. And that also comes with Andrew Garfield. But the problem with Andrew Garfield is Andrew Garfield gets tainted by things like Amazing Spider-Man 2, which again, and spoiler, it's not going to appear on the Five of the Best list either. Again, a big shock. Two truly wonderful, no, they're both awful. But these are two great actors, and because they've been in stinker films, if you like, Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield, and both of them in this film in particular. Now, Andrew Garfield has had, I would say, one or two better performances than this. I'm sure we'll get there. But for Jesse Eisenberg in particular, this is his best. I know I talked about him not too long ago when we talked about Zombieland, and in a very different role, different performance. But Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg in this is probably, to date, his crowning performance. Probably his best. And I find that the two of these actors, the kind of yin and yang of each other, you know, I like using that term of, they bring each other up. One would be the more confident, outgoing, extroverted person, and Jesse Eisenberg is clearly the more, not the social guy in The Social Network. Yeah, irony. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's the performances are great, but the story being told, and you would probably think to yourself, and to be honest with you, I actually didn't see this when it was in theaters. I didn't really find it that interesting. I didn't think, when I seen the trailers or when I was told there's a Facebook movie coming out, I didn't go, oh, I can't wait to see that. I wasn't truly that interested. It was only when I went back and watched it a few years later. This film is so good. The quality oozes out of this film. Because, yes, it has these great performances. And the director of David Fincher, who is obviously, you know, his quality shines through as a director too. But overall, there is just so much to absorb. As I said at the start, there's the business side of things. As a business film and as a kind of entrepreneurial film, it's one of the best actually in that regard. And then I just find that Social Network is really, really top tier when it comes to storytelling on kind of, what would be the word, like amplifying reality. You know, if you think of a documentary of how Facebook can be it wouldn't be like this, because there is the real, there is the cinematic storytelling throughout it, of course, but there is the real points. When you look back and if you read up on the history of how all this played out, the history and the situation with the Winklevoss twins, there is so much throughout The Social Network that is true to all accounts. I say true with loosely, of course. I don't know. I wasn't in the room, as I'm sure you guys weren't either. But The Social Network is a film that I didn't expect to love. I went in because I had actually heard from someone else that went, by the way, The Social Network is so good. And I went, what? What do you mean The Social Network's really good? It's like, yeah, no, The Social Network is an awesome film. Great performances, great directorial moments, great storytelling, all of it. And I went, for the Facebook movie? Really? And I went, yeah, give it a go. Give it a go. And I tell you what, I was very glad I did. And that's what I'm telling you guys. The Social Network is one of the crowning performances, certainly for Jesse Eisenberg. Andrew Garfield is right up there. There's a few iconic scenes between the two of them. I'm sure you've seen them in some passing of life, whether it's just a meme on Twitter or it's just some kind of situation that you've seen it. The Social Network is as good as my friend told me. So basically, if you're like me and you went, I don't want to watch the Facebook movie because I don't care. I don't give a toss about Facebook and, yeah, how it was founded and all that stuff, and Mark Zuckerberg's an alien or whatever because of that court thing that was a meme. But do take the advice that I took, which was, actually, this film's awesome, and go and watch it. So I'm now going to tell you, this film's awesome, go and watch it. Social Network is class. Give it a go. Number 2. The King's Speech is directed by Tom Hooper, stars Colin Firth, Geoffrey Rush, and Helen Bonham Carter. So when I started writing a draft list for this year, I had this film first. I had The King's Speech as first, and for a long time I was sticking by that, and at the very last minute I changed my mind. So just have it in your head that this is probably the closest, if not the, this would be the closest so far to a number 1 that ended up as number 2. And that sounds like a toilet thing, but let's not linger on that. The King's Speech is, I don't want to regret my decision of putting it in number 2, because number 1, and when we get there you'll probably go, oh, of course, that's why I get it. But The King's Speech is a film that not as many people have seen. I would think that the people who have seen the film in number 1, and the kind of more iconic film that is number 1, that's why it's there. But The King's Speech was so close for me. so close to getting into this number one spot. And the reason for that is actually a really intriguing one, because I went into the King's Speech, and I wouldn't say that any performances any of the actors given the performances in this film were anywhere near the top of my list. People like Colin Firth, Geoffrey Rush, even Hannibal and Carter, any of those three that kind of were the leads, especially Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush. Colin Firth, of course, we've had him in so many of these kind of English films, things like Bridget Jones' Diary, and even something more recent, and things like Kingsman, and these different kind of performances. And Geoffrey Rush, of course, probably best known as Barbossa in the Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, or however many films they ended up making. I'm not going on a tangent about that again. I've talked about Pirates of the Caribbean enough. But the King's Speech. So this is a film about the king who has to make a speech. There we go. That's okay. Bye, folks. No, that's far too like. But the King's Speech is a film that really, truly surprised me. It is not a film that I expected to love, get so emotionally invested in, and get so... I was in awe of this film. The King's Speech truly encapsulates movie storytelling. And you probably think to yourself, well, on the premise, it doesn't really sound... A bit like what we said there when talking about Social Network. You went, so the Social Network, it was, oh, well, it's a Facebook movie, and you might like it, but you probably won't. And that's what was in my head. And a bit like this with the King's Speech, I went, it's just the king from years ago that had to make a speech. Why should I care about this? Oh my god. I'm so glad that and like with Social Network, I'm so glad I gave it a chance. Even more so in this film. The King's Speech is truly masterful storytelling, as I said. Where do I start? Let's start with the kind of partner performance of the two mains, which is Colin Firth and Geoffrey Rush. Let's talk about Geoffrey Rush first. Geoffrey Rush as the kind of vocal coach, if you like, of the king. So essentially, the story is Colin Firth has a stutter, and he's the king, and he has to give a war speech. And that is on the description on IMDb, so that is not giving any big spoilers. I'm sure if you've seen a trailer, or if you've seen anything about the film, you get you know anything about history. I'm not a history guy, so I learned about it from movies like a lot of us do. The true historians of the world. But anyway, Geoffrey Rush. So, as I said earlier, Barbossa is my real experience of him as an actor. Barbossa, yeah, good performance, but isn't the thing that makes everyone love Pirates of the Caribbean, of course. Just amplifies some of the brilliant things from that film. But Geoffrey Rush as this vocal coach for Colin Firth's king in this film, it's one of my favourite performances in recent memory. And I say recent, it was a lot of years ago, over a decade ago. But Geoffrey, it always sticks out to me. When people say to me, why do you like the King's Speech so much? It's the performance of Geoffrey Rush. Because Colin Firth is brilliant in this film, and it's definitely my favourite performance of his. Hands down. Yeah, I think he won the Oscar for this, was that right? Or he was nominated? It was something like that. He was up there, wasn't that right? Yeah, he did. Didn't he? Won the best leading actor for this film. But it was the two of them collectively, and it is definitely the best Colin Firth performance. People will go, oh, but what about Mamma Mia? No, definitely not. But Geoffrey Rush is the one that really surprised me, because if you'd have said to me, the guy who plays Barbossa is going to have one of your favourite performances over the last decade, I'd go, what are you talking about? Will you stop talking waffle in my ear? Geoffrey Rush is amazing in this. Helena Bonham Carter, of course, this is kind of the era where she's in everything, or started to become in everything. She's good, but she's not anything to the point of, like, outstanding. It really is the core two. It is the Colin Firth, Geoffrey Rush, it's the King George and Lionel Logue, it's the vocal coach and the teacher, or it's the teacher and the student, but the student is the King of England. The dynamic is brilliant. And as I keep saying, I didn't think going into this film I would love it as much as I did. And when we get to number one here, which we're about to get to, you can understand why it's number one. But for this film, and what we've just talked about with The Social Network as well, both of these films are two that are a bit of a niche. They're a bit of a, well, I don't think even if I watched the trailer, if I'm anyway interested, if you like your history, you'd probably go, okay, well, I'll maybe give this King's Speech a go. If you like your kind of history of technology and things being founded and businesses being founded, then you would like The Social Network. But they are quite a niche. They are quite like a, you know, you'd have to be interested in a certain thing or have some kind of history with certain things. And that's why I really encourage you to give both of these a chance. And I think if I had to really pick, definitely The King's Speech. The King's Speech, I found myself enthralled. Certainly, it is not a crazily fast-paced movie. It is not a film that is, you know, action shootouts and gunfights and, you know, mad, exciting stuff. It's more about the slowness of the dialogue. It's more about the well-craftedness, it's not a word, but we're going to use it, of the, just all of it. All of the, I'm waxing lyrical about it. The King's Speech is so good. So good. It is a film that I cannot praise enough. Because when we're about to get number one, and we're nearly there, but I just want to say, The King's Speech is a film that if there's any of these films, from all the five of the best that you, because a lot of these films that I talk about, and we're about to talk about number one, and you'll go, of course, yeah, I've seen that, I know how good that is. The King's Speech, you're probably not. Do yourself a favour. If you love movies the way I do, which I'm sure you do, The King's Speech really stands out to me as one of the more recent, and again, I say recent, even though it was like 10 years ago, which makes me feel old, but anyway, and it's so top tier quality. It is filled to the brim with brilliant cinema storytelling. It is simply a film that I like and love a lot. Now let's get to number one, because you're probably thinking to yourself, if you haven't worked it out already, where is that film on his list? And here it is. Number one. Inception. It's written and directed by Christopher Nolan and stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Elliot Page, Ken Watanabe, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, and Marion Cotillard. So I'm sure you understand. You get why Inception is number one. And you probably went on to this year. And if you do, like some people do, before they watch this whole video, they probably have a look at the IMDb page in the description, which I don't really plug that much. But if you do, and you want to, before the thing starts, you go, well, where's that? You can kind of maybe work it out yourself. If you went through the list, you probably went, yeah, Inception's going to be number one. If it's not number one, it's probably like number 2 or 3 at the least. Everybody knows the quality that Inception has. And you're probably thinking to yourself, you said you had King's Speech at number one over Inception. I truly love The King's Speech. And it was only when because I watched Inception 2, 3, maybe 4 times in the kind of year or two just after it came out. But I actually hadn't seen Inception for, God, it nearly was 10 years since I last seen this film. And I thought, do you know what? I will. I'll go and sit down and I'll rewatch one of Christopher Nolan's greats. And I don't know what it was that had maybe made me, over time, kind of, my love for it had maybe waned a little bit. But when I rewatched Inception, I just was straight back in. It was straight back in. And the reason that Inception is so good, now, this is a film that, and we've talked about this a little bit for Christopher Nolan's films, that people wax lyrical about. And they're the kind of films like Inception or other films that we'll probably talk about in the future, we've already talked about on the series, that everybody talks about how good they are. And Inception is another one of those films that you go, is it really that good? People probably ask, like, everybody talks about it, is it really that good? Inception is. Inception is worth every bit of the credit it gets from everybody. And we'll go back to our main man, the guy of the episode, which is Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, Leonardo DiCaprio, which we talked about already in Shutter Island, and his performance and his just in more of a more thrilling detective drama that is Shutter Island. This is more of a spectacle, and it truly is a spectacle, this film. It's not often I would use that word, to completely describe a film, but Inception is probably the definition of a spectacle. And Christopher Nolan, a lot of his films you could describe as that. Some of the upcoming ones, I'll use that same word, spectacle. Because some of the scenes in this film, some of the story beats, of course, the story being told in this film, which I'll get to in a minute, is brilliant. But something that really stands out, and probably the bit that, if you haven't seen it in a while like me, you probably think to yourself, I remember the visuals. I remember the scenes and these dreams throughout the film that are just, they stick with you. The one that really sticks out in my head, and probably you guys too, is the cafe scene in Paris, where they're having a chat and everything just gets flipped on its head, if you like. And that's the first time, and it was actually from that point onwards in the film, because when I put it on again, and I watched it again, and it had actually been that long that I actually had forgotten about some of the beats of the film, some of the parts, certainly in the middle portion, maybe in the second act, that I forgot about some bits that are some kind of key plot details. I only really remembered the start and the end after the 10 years. So it was kind of coming in a little bit fresh, but it was when that scene in the cafe and the start of the second act happens. That's the part when I went, oh yeah, that's why I remembered why this film is so memorable, it's so iconic, if you like. The spectacle of, again, I use that word because I feel it's so appropriate for this film. Inception it's just brilliant. It's brilliantly crafted. Of course, Christopher Nolan at the helm. This guy is as good a director as there's been in the last 15 years of what he's achieved. As I said earlier, there'll be a lot more of him on these episodic months of talking about film. I'm sure he'll appear more and more. But this is one of his best. And when you talk to people about what all, if you said to someone who wasn't really a movie person, you went, oh, Christopher Nolan's such a great director, they would go, well, what movies has he done? And you went Inception, they go, oh yeah, that is great. Like, even the most casual people have probably seen Inception. And it is a very, and I don't use this word too often when I apply it to movies, but it's a smart movie. It's a film that, it's so, the story beats, because of the subject matter in the film, it's so easy to, and I use this kind of as a pun because it applies to certain points of the story, but it has the potential to collapse in on itself and its logic. And of course, the logic in this film is a bit kind of out there, but the rules it set for its style, when it sets its stall out and it tells you the rules of what the film is, it sticks to them. It sticks to them. It doesn't cheat. It keeps you as the audience. And, because we start this film, we don't know much about dreams. The story is essentially dreams and dreams and dreams inside each other that are, and trying to plant these ideas into people's heads and trying to, you would think on the outset it's quite a mind bender of a film, if you like. And I compared to something a bit more recently, which was Tenet. Of course, Christopher Nolan again, one of his more recent films. And Tenet, I found, went too far the other way. It didn't engage the audience enough. It didn't keep us all. And not that Tenet wasn't the worst film in the world by any means, but I just don't think it was anywhere near what Inception was able to achieve. Because Inception is just, it's the right mix. It's the right mix. It's just enough of each part. It's just enough intelligence, just enough of keeping the audience on their toes, but also keeping the audience informed. But let's go back to talking about some of the performances, because of course we've got the main man Leo continuing to do what he does. He is, this is his year, of course, we'll talk about that. And yeah, I again, what I said earlier, I don't need to tell you again how good Leonardo DiCaprio is. But I do have to say, this is one of his better, of more memorable performances as Cobb in this film. But let's talk about two other performances. First, I want to say about Elliot Page. Elliot Page in this film, their performance in this is really good. It's probably the best of them, I'll be honest. Now, I have to say, I haven't watched Umbrella Academy. I know they're in that. The performance before this that really stuck out to me. if I can speak English, sticks out to me is Juno. Them along with Michael Cera, a very different film than this, admittedly. And that wasn't a film I particularly loved in any way, I just thought was fine. I know a lot of people really love that film, wasn't really for me. But they're brilliant as Ariadne in this film, quite a unique name. But another performance I want to talk about, because yes, we've got Tom Hardy, yes, we've got Marion Cotillard, who are both really good in this film. But one performance that I think is probably my favourite of theirs, of all their whole career, and I have to admit I'm not a massive fan of them as an actor as a whole, but Joseph Gordon-Levitt. Joseph Gordon-Levitt in this film, as again, like I talked about Mark Ruffalo as kind of the Watson to Sherlock in the detective side of things in Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio. This is kind of his counterpart in this film, in a similar kind of role, where it is the two of them bouncing off each other, and of course you bring in Elliot Page to that. But let's talk about those other two performances I mentioned. Tom Hardy, of course, this is the one before the Bane, if you like, before he worked with Christopher Nolan on that, and you know that became the iconic voice and everything. But Tom Hardy as Ames in this film is also really good. Some of the even Dilip Rao. There's a lot of these. Cillian Murphy, of course, we know his quality. We know how good Cillian Murphy is. Certainly in the last kind of 5 or so years, he's been one of the forefronts of movie and even television storytelling and Peaky Blinders. He really has came into his own, if you like. And Marion Cotillard. Now, Marion Cotillard is someone that I don't have a particular affinity with. I think she is just okay in the Dark Knight trilogy. I can't say I've really loved her in many other performances, but I think in her performance in Mal in Inception is absolutely fantastic. She is so good in this. The emotion that she conveys and the minimal amount that she's in this film, that makes it sound like she's in one scene. No, she is throughout this film. She's scattered throughout this film. But the way her and Leonardo DiCaprio work so well together in this film, and I really was surprised at how much I found her performance so good. And it wasn't something that whenever I seen this 10 years ago and watched it a few times, she wasn't really a part of the film that I latched onto. But being a bit older and watching the film again and coming at it with somewhat fresh eyes, Marion Cotillard is one of the best parts of this film. Her performance as Mal in this and the way she's integrated into the story is wonderful. But yeah, overall, Inception is so worthy of the top spot. I know I said about King's Speech being there, but watching this again, it's hard to deny just how iconic Inception is. Inception is one of Nolan's best, and that is no small feat, because Nolan has so many, and probably will continue to have so many, truly great films. He has such a fantastic list of films under his belt as a director, and to have written a lot of them too, including this one, it's some going. It's some going as a director, it's some going as a man. Fair play to you, Chris. Go on, my son. But yeah, Inception is... You know how good Inception is. Again, it's another one of these films where I feel like I'm pandering a little bit, because you know how good this is. Me telling you how good Inception is, you knew it. As soon as number one appeared on that screen, and then you seen Inception, you went, oh, of course. Same way that happened a few years ago with another Nolan film. I'm sure you can guess which one, but I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen that 5 of the best yet. Inception is so good, I don't need to tell you how good it is. If you haven't seen it again, or if you're like me, and 10 years ago you watched it 2, 3, 4 times, and then it's been ages since you've seen it, go back and rewatch it. You come in with, again, like I did, somewhat fresh eyes, and I think you'll love it maybe even more, because I know I did. I've came back to even appreciate this film even more so. Inception is brilliant, you know it's brilliant, and that's exactly why it's my number one for this year. So that's been 2010, a top quality year with quite a variety of films. We've had comedies, we've had entrepreneurial ships. I'm making up words as I go here. That's definitely not a word. Entrepreneurial ship. I hope it is, because that might be one of the longest words I've ever used in my life. Anyway, we've had things like The King's Speech, kind of a historical event that's conveyed so well to cinema, and we had Inception, which is, in short, it's Inception. It's Christopher Nolan doing as good as he does. A really, really good year. And quite a varied year. Maybe one of the most varied years we've had. And even something like the other guys. But let's do what we always do when we get here to the summary. Let's talk about the honourable mentions, and was there any close to breaking into the top 5? Truthfully, there was 2. There wasn't too many honourable mentions this year, but there was 2 that pushed the other guys for me. The first one was Black Swan. Black Swan, the crowning performance of Natalie Portman, the one that got her the Oscar, and deservedly so. Black Swan is, again, when I talked about The King's Speech or Social Network, about these films that on the outset you would go, why would I be interested in that? A ballet film about someone who wants to perform Swan Lake? Why on this earth would I care about that? Black Swan, she gives everything for that performance. Literally, she gives everything. Black Swan's really good. And it was unlucky not to break it in. It was just a personal preference of mine to put the other guys in. I knew when I was doing 2010, the other guys could have been anywhere from 3rd to 5th, because it's one of my favourite comedies around this time, and it was definitely getting in there. The other of the honourable mentions was Insidious. Insidious, another horror trilogy, saga, whatever, that has just been drawn out to death. And it's just sequel, and the quality dips every time. But the first Insidious is really good. It's one of the better horror films of this time. It's one of the better horror films that sets up these kind of, what's it, multiverse? It's not even a multiverse, just these big sequel-laden sagas that just go on, where it just becomes, let's churn these out, like a Saw, like The Conjuring that leads to all these spin-offs. But the quality is there. Insidious, I think, it was probably, of the 2, it was maybe slightly closer than Black Swan to getting into the top 5. I don't know where it would have went, because the top 5 was pretty set. But Insidious is really good, a shout out to it as well. And also, the last one I want to shout out is The Fighter, Christian Bale and Mark Wahlberg. Now, I said that Mark Wahlberg has a 1 in 10 good performance, but actually, he's got 2 good ones this year. Go on, Mark. Well done, sir. But then a lot of them stink after that for a while. But yeah, I'm really pleased with this year. 2010, I remember looking back, and when I first looked at this year, when I was making the kind of draft list for 5 of the best, I thought, 2010's not great. I mean, you've got Inception, and you've got Shutter Island, and that's really it. But the more I delved deeper, and the more I thought about it, and rewatched a few of them, rewatched The King's Speech, rewatched Inception, rewatched the other guys, I just thought, no, this year's really good. The top 5 is a worthy top 5. Not a bad set of honourable mentions as well, especially those 2 I just mentioned there. 2010 was a great year. It's a great start to this decade too, but this decade will get stronger and stronger, I can tell you that, guys, for sure. We've got 2011 next, that'll be next month and ongoing. If you want to stick around, if you've enjoyed listening to me talking about these movies and celebrating this year and moving on to the next year, and we'll go and go and go until we're up to the present day, if you did enjoy, please stick around. Subscribe, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed it. I would appreciate you so much if you did. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.